You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and we have Chloe Niclas here, an illustrator who caught my eye in the New York Times book review cover, and beautiful illustrations and art. Chloe, welcome to the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. I would say that I get excited by kind of fantastical, deep images of worlds. So like when I look at the work that you've done and has been published, in, like I said, the New York Times book review, Harper's, and Spirit Box. Yeah, just incredible work. And I look at it, and there's one in particular with the spiral staircase. And as you go down through all these levels, there's just these magnificent worlds and levels that are within it, and you invoke it really quickly. So I kind of just drop in and go into that. Tell us how, like, you're doing this work for a bit, and the New York Times book review is a beautiful, well-loved publication with magnificent art. How'd you end up there? How'd you end up there, and what's part of your story in your work?
Yeah, so I, starting off freelancing, I was emailing my work, just cold emailing to art directors. Editorial work is one of the easier places to start off as an illustrator. It's just like a one-off job for a magazine or a newspaper or something like that. And they were one of the people that I was emailing. And one day, the art director, Matt Dorfman, he just responded and he gave me an assignment for the cover. And then that could have sort of started a really nice working relationship. So that's been going really well. Yeah, I just cold emailed with some images and an intro. And then, yeah.
I think they saw the images. And moved from there.
Thank you.
One of the pieces here that I just wanted to mention, as far as like my interaction with some of your images, I love that some of them were tied to Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Yes.
Which I grew up in the 80s, and those books were really prominent kind of like at that time. They were kind of like D&D, Dungeons and Dragons inspired books and fighting fantasy. And those books were so important to me. And again, going back to all the worlds type of thing where, just growing up in the city, just messing around and stuff. But I love books, and those illustrations, both the words and the adventure within them, but the illustrations just were always so powerful and moving and fantastic. I almost always felt like, look at this drawing that's in this like paperback book. So I just want to tell you, when I saw those images, it kind of recaptured my connection to that, and I was just thrilled to see your work there. Anything in particular about that type of adventurous book series that you connected with?
That was one of my first assignments ever. I actually got assigned that in 2018. And at the time, I thought I was going to be mostly doing like middle grade sci-fi, mystery, fantasy genres for that age group. And I still would like to do that. But that was like what I was gearing towards. And so I emailed them, and they responded to me. It was like the first response I ever got from a publisher or an art director. And and what I really loved about it was that it wasn't just like a fantastical story, but it was also tying into historical figure, Mata Hari. And so that was really fun to learn about, because I got to learn all about her And I listened to a bunch of podcasts about her and got to do a lot of research. That's what's really fun about illustrating, is that you get to learn in depth about each piece, each project that you're working for at a given point. And learning about that whole era of time that she was in, and having to research, like, the kinds of clothes and all the locations that things were taking place. And so it was definitely like a historical fiction fantasy um, genre of work. It's a lot of
Yeah.
fun, very
Yeah.
imaginative.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing out those other components too. And I saw the piece you actually, yeah, of course, referring to Mata Hari, and I saw one image of Mata Hari, and I think it's with the dolphin, and it's almost again almost like the spiral funnel, but there's a world down into the ocean, but it's fascinating to see within the spirals feathers and natural pieces. And I just was looking at it, and this thing should not be, but is and should be, like very quickly. Beautiful image. What was it like putting that together, that process?
Yeah, well, that piece, I think that piece is one of my favorites that I had done for the book. And it was a very, like, I remember that piece very vividly because the the request for that image was to have her riding a dolphin through a space vortex that was underwater. And I had no idea at the time. I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to draw this. Like, I had
Yeah,
never drawn anything like that before. Um, and I realized just how many abstractions there are in making an image like that, and like having that come across realistically. It's like a combination of a wormhole and like bits of water and seaweed and like watery types of textures. And it ended up being a lot of fun. And I was very intimidated by it at first, and then it became the best piece of the book, I think.
yeah, it's really wonderful, and I think one of in hearing you describe it, one of the things that I connected to was like in my head was, yeah, the space ocean thing, right? Because how do you transport quickly between those two? But then I think about when I've looked at like underwater, like the life that lives there and that whole world that's like underneath us, and it's always compared to alien, like otherworldly. So for me there's an inherent connection between those two, but they
Oh, yeah.
seem opposite, and I think that the art pulls it together. Is like, I didn't know that I was seeing that vortex. Obviously there's a vortex there that brings in these components, but for me it created that juncture of ocean, space. Yeah, same thing, kind of, but not.
Yeah, well, I think like visually, if you think about it, there probably are a lot of similarities. Just like if there, if you look at a wave or like a water vortex, and then you see like a wormhole in outer space, there are a lot of like
Yeah,
similar um, like similar tonal shapes going on. Just a lot of abstractions, and
yeah,
the key was to like figure out the shapes of those tones and abstractions, and then like kind of fit them together, collage them together
yeah,
visually. And yeah, so
yeah.
it ended up working out pretty well. So I was happy with that. Yeah, space. I definitely think that space and deep ocean are very similar in many ways.
Yeah, I was thinking too about the darkness, right? I mean, it's so dark. And I also think about the inability for humans to naturally go into those places without some sort of tech to
It's true.
survive,
It's
you
true. They're
know?
both of those realms are so mysterious to us. We
Yeah.
both like to go and explore any of those areas. We need so much equipment just to survive.
Yeah. I'm thinking of some of the past episodes, I dropped into some like marine biology a couple times, and it's probably like there's just a pursuit that I'm thinking about now that's kind of more similar than I thought. Okay, Chloe. Um, Talking about identity and talking about being an artist, I had a question about when did you see yourself as an artist? Was it a feeling all of a sudden? How did you have artist as in how do you have artist in your identity?
I always, I was always seeing myself that way. When I could hold a pencil, I was enjoying drawing since then. And then by the time I was 4, I had a callus on one of my fingers from drawing for so many hours. Yeah, it's always been that way since the very beginning, I think. Uh,
You felt compelled, like just did you recognize it early on as just like think something you needed to do, or did you like see it as like to help with like stress or anxiety? Like it was just a compulsion, just you just did it.
Yeah, I think it. I mean, I think it does change over time throughout the course of your life. Like as a kid, I think it was more a sense. It was more helping relieve stress or um, anxiety, and I was always very introverted, so I just liked to be alone most of the time and drawing and then like as you go through life, it's it kind of goes through phases. It was always there. It was always like, yes, this is probably what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And
Yeah.
then, like, as you start to work in it professionally, sometimes then it can become the source of your stress because now you're under super tight deadlines for it and everything. But at the end of the day, if I wasn't doing it professionally, I would still be doing it for myself because that's what I like to do. And that's what it's always been for me. Um, yeah, I used to stay up really late as a kid. I would like, if I couldn't get to sleep, I would like go back and start drawing really, really late at night, listen to books on tape. Um, Still do that to this day with podcasts. So,
Yeah, yeah, you mentioned that now. That's what I'm thinking. I'm like old enough to know like the books on tape, 24 of them or a 50 pack with the Stephen King book.
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then, after it was cassette tapes, then it was on CD, right? And then people had them. I never did this, but people would download them onto their devices and whatnot. People still do that, but for me, it's podcasts now because they're just ongoing, and there's no end point to podcasts. So
Yes, thank you. I'm going to zone in on a promo here with Chloe. Thank you very much. Well, I've been talking more about podcasts on the show. And like when I got into podcasts, I've said recently, I didn't I wasn't into them. Like for me, it was the medium. Like it wasn't like I heard I heard good podcasts. I'm not being like that. Like I heard really good podcasts, but
yeah,
I wasn't like into them. It wasn't a habit. It wasn't habitual. And you know, but when I started, it was like the medium itself. And now, deep into this, I see myself as very much an advocate for this on some of the principles of like access. And, one big piece, the heck with everything else, like dropping into pieces of culture, like or geek culture or weirdness or whatever, where people feel comfortable. And there's hundreds of people dropping in and being like, let's talk about this shit. Like, podcasts do that. And I feel that people can connect. I really do. I feel people connect and be heard. And just hearing about how doing research, I've had a lot of conversations recently about people doing research where now they'll say, maybe not just say Google it. They'll be like, oh, I'll check out a podcast of how to fix the carburetor or something. I don't know that would work. I can't fix anything. But, like you're talking about being like, I'm going to podcast this. And my goodness, if they've replaced both my addiction and your addiction to books on tape, I think that's what's happened. It's just transferred.
yeah, I think it is. I mean, but it's great. I mean, I definitely agree with you that podcasts feel so much more accessible and it's not so formal. Like it's a conversation. It feels like you're, at least when I'm working on a piece, like you spend so much time alone, and sometimes it's just very isolating.
Yeah.
And when you're listening to a podcast, it feels like there's other people in the room with you, and you're like not alone. You're not so alone working. You're kind of like listening in on a conversation. So it's nice.
Yeah, I also I also think it's like something about like talking about art and bigger questions, which sometimes can like open up for myself, like as the host, but for artists themselves. I know I've talked to artists and like they were struggling, like they weren't feeling good, like they weren't productive. I mean, think about it, pandemic recently, and like, what am I doing? And at times they're like, when I did the episode, they're like, like, what is art? They're like, this is why I'm friggin' doing this shit. Like, I know now, like, why I am. And it doesn't always happen that way. Somebody, everybody's different. But I think there's a hopefulness like in art, or like an excitement. I wanted to, speaking of art, I have to ask you a couple of the bigger ones and just kind of like learn your ideas about what you dedicate yourself towards. The big question, Chloe, is what is art?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things to a lot of different people. It serves a lot of different functions, and I think like just in terms of illustration versus fine art, there are slightly different functions there. I mean, there are a lot of parallels and overlaps, so there are a lot of similarities there. But illustration usually is getting paired with a piece of writing or something that's getting published. In the case of an editorial, it's going alongside an essay or an article or short story, something of that nature. So it is fulfilling a purpose beyond just the image itself, which I think in the fine art sphere sometimes it's like just about the image itself, but in the illustration sphere it's part of a larger piece that's going out.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking in a recent episode with Lauren Redness, and
Uh-huh.
and talking about the composition of the whole, and think about all the disparate components of creating a book and such. And there's the different processes you talk about where you immerse yourself in what is the image to express and what somebody's doing. But there's a skill you have to be part of a component as part of a part of the whole. So it's like a work, that work process. Do you like do you like uh freelancing, and uh, does that match kind of like your approach to how you think about art?
I think, yeah, I mean, I personally I really like to do my own personal work as well, and I like to freelance too because I like working with art directors. And the great thing about that is that you're always learning about something new and different, and you never know what it's going to be, and it keeps things very interesting. um, there's you just never know what is next that you're going to have to learn about and then draw with that. And it's great to collaborate with art directors too, because they're very smart people, and they'll get you to kind of expand yourself in ways that you never thought that you would. But then making personal work is great too, because you get to do whatever you want. I get to, make the weird things that I want to make that I might not necessarily get the chance to make on an assignment. I get to kind of make things exist that I wish existed in the world, um,
Yeah.
that I can't, but with assignments, you do try to channel yourself into them as much as you can, because that's also what helps make it interesting for other people as well.
Yeah, I always think there's something about like there's always I always feel like a natural resistance to being thrust into this. I mean, it's
Right.
like within a range of what I would want to do, but it's
Yeah.
like thrust is always kind of like a oppositional component for myself, where I'm like, at least initially, where I'm like, no, 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 I
I
want
get
to do
that.
it a different way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I can understand that for sure. I think, yeah, but the thing about it is, a lot of times the art director knows your work to a certain degree that they can match you with something that they think is that they think that you can do well. And sometimes it's really surprising. Sometimes it's like something that you never would have imagined doing for yourself. But then you take it on, and then you realize, like, oh, like actually, I could make this really cool. Like, I could kind of inject my own interests into this in this way or that
Yeah.
way. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so there are a lot of opportunities to do that. But yes, I mean, I think that's why it's always important to also be doing your own personal stuff when you're not on an assignment, so that you can fulfill your own artistic
Yeah, and I
needs.
think with talking about assignments too, is like if you're I think I've been thinking a lot about this lately, like in a supportive environment and you have eyes around you, if people see what you can do, because you don't know all that stuff. Like none of us do, but who are cued into and see what you can do. So you get the assignment, you get the challenge, and you're like a little bit of the same type of thing, like, "Arr," but then like get into it, and then every time I'm in that situation and I go through almost every single time I can think of when I know there's merit to doing it, when I'm done, I'm like, I'm smarter than I was.
Yeah.
Like, cause I know more and I learned how to deal with that reaction and be pushed in a way. So when you have folks around you like that, and like you said, the eyes of somebody thinking about your assignment, they're like, she doesn't know she can do this maybe or
Mhm.
connect these things, but she can. So that's your next one. And then that's good, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think, there are a lot of great reasons to work with art directors. And they can see possibilities for your work that you might never have imagined for yourself. And if it's not like, and not that this doesn't happen that frequently with me, thankfully, but like if something isn't going that well, or if you're not really into the assignment that you're doing, there's a very definite end point to it. So it's like you finish it and then it's over with, and then you move
Yeah.
on. So
Yeah, I wonder. Like, I wanted to ask you something. It's like a little, maybe a little bit of a thought experiment. But one of the things, going back to a recent conversation I had was, um, I'm looking through a book in this instance again, going back to Lauren Redness
Mhm.
in my head, a book called Oak Flat, and it's this incredible book. And one of the questions I asked, I'm like, there's this whole world that's within this book, no doubt, and you hold it up, and then but you go within it and you take one disparate image that's part of a continuum. It's almost like, think about comic books or sequential art, and then you pull it out and you show it
Mhm.
and you display it in a museum setting. Museum setting says to me, hey folks, bigger deal, there's a little bit of, it's on the wall. And I think about that thing as sometimes when I see somebody's work, again, how it's presented. Hey, New York Times book review cover, freaking awesome. It's compelling, draws you in. But I think to myself, you and others, it's a sunny boulevard in LA. It's a great day. It's a good art district and environment. Somebody walks into the gallery, lots of light coming in, and in your room in display, there's 10 of those, the image displayed the way that you want them. I become so fascinated with the idea in that type of experiment because for me, people who aren't like really into art need to be shown.
Mhm.
Like they need to be presented in such a way and not artificiality. Like, look at this, behold this, and look at it in this setting. And it's the same piece. Your work is, discrete and in those pieces, but even taking a look at like choose your own adventure and then they're super big. I always think about how things are presented and how that impacts uh the artist and the audience. Do you think about things in those type of ways, or did what I say is kind of like that idea?
Yeah, so I think that like for assignments, it's usually being printed in something like a
Yeah,
magazine or something like that. So there are like technical aspects to it.
yeah,
Um, like thinking about like, is this going to print dark, or is this going to is this detail not going to show up very well because it's very small, and it's going to print at this size. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, there are like very technical aspects to illustration that way. I think with gallery work, it's a whole other ballpark, right? Because then it's about the space that it's sitting in, and the
yeah,
lighting, and the way that it's all arranged. And but what's cool about experiencing art in a gallery setting instead of like in print is that you can get right up close to the piece, and you can see like the everything that
yeah,
actually went into it in a lot
yeah,
higher resolution than you can if it was in print.
yeah, yeah. And part of it too, I've learned on the show is like, is not to assume like a reverence for institution, right? Like, because I've had conversation with artists who like really got me into a good conversation about, you celebrate street art as well, and there's exclusivity and all those type of things. I think in general, the reason why I was asking is I'm just really fascinated by how things are shown and displayed and their impact on people. I'll give you another example. I've had a guest on Brianna C. Martins, who does
Yes.
Spooky
I
Girls.
was really into that episode, by the way.
Oh, thank you. But here's this, like, so I'm deeply fascinated by the people and the ghosts and the history and how they're depicted. She's pulling out these spirits. I don't know what's going on. It's art. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But I saw just recently she had a post on Instagram where the whole thing was laid out. And it was enormous. Like she mentioned that in the show, but it was like if you look at like a massive bay window,
Wow.
like that was the depiction. And I think about display. You see things on Instagram and you're like, oh, what an image. And like you get pulled in. But then I'm like, she told me they were big, but they're like, cathedral ceiling. Like, I mean, they're just very big.
Wow.
And it was such a radical thought because I'm like, what was I like what am I looking at as far as the thing itself? I'm glad you enjoyed that episode. That was completely fascinated by
Yeah,
everything there.
I didn't, you just kind of blew my mind too. I didn't realize that they were that big. I mean, because when you see again, there's the whole context of scale, right? And
Yep.
that's a huge issue with Instagram, is that a lot of times, unless you make intentional efforts to show the scale of something, you might not
I
know how
know.
big something
Oh
is.
no.
Um,
Yeah.
and her work is really interesting too, because I also kind of am interested in those like old photographs, that like, and I saw her work too and everything. I just found it very fascinating.
Well, yeah, and after that episode, I picked up a old photograph habit that I didn't have before. And even on the episode, she was mentioning that she finds some of her photos. She's up in Massachusetts, finds them down in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where I was born. And I'm like, oh my god, now I'm hooked. I go over to the bookstore, Browser's bookstore, a block and a half away, and check out the ephemera.
It's so fascinating. I've always,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just really fascinating. And I've seen those, in antique stores, they have like boxes of,
Yep.
centuries old photographs in them, and they belonged, like, you just wonder who are these people, and who owned these, that they ended up here. And like, they're so anonymous, the people in them, and yet like they had full-fledged lives of their own. And this is like sort of the last record of them that people centuries
Yeah,
in
in
the
a
future will
box.
see. Yeah.
In a box. And it's like I think there's something in that once Brianna hooked me more on the idea. But it's like I think if you're sensitive to it as well, right? I think about stories, right? I mean, it's all about stories.
Yeah.
That girl has this face on it. She didn't get this one little thing that's captured, and now there's a whole story from 1902 that you're like, whoa, like
Absolutely.
if you're sensitive to it.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, that's why I was so obsessed with them for so long. Even though they were people that I had no connection to whatsoever, each of those things tells a whole story. Every single detail in one of those images tells an entire backstory. Tells
Yeah.
you, I mean,
All right.
anybody who, is versed in dissecting any of those images can tell you what time period each thing is from, and then that tells you like roughly the years that it was taken in, and then about their lives, because the details in their clothes and things like that. just infinite information that you can pick up from those.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a old photograph rabbit hole panel. We'll figure that one out
That would
next
be so cool.
On the old photographs. I asked you your thoughts about what art is, and another question I have related to what it is what its role is, and whether that role has changed, say now with things going on. Does it feel different? But what is the role of art?
Yeah, well, I definitely think it has had it has had a prevalent role ever since humans have been making it. I mean, if you go all the way back, like the first forms of art, like the early hominids making art, those had very significant functions in their lives, and it follows us all the way up into present day. And you know, anytime that there's like sort of rupture in society or like big things going on in our development as humans, then it plays a role there too. And yeah, I mean, I think it also serves your own personal needs too. It's for the public, but also very much for yourself, and fulfilling your own needs and your own things that you need to get out of your system and into the world.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. I don't always ask this question because I think it's asked a lot, and not that it's not useful, but I'm one thing I am really interested in as far as seeing your work is what type of things you were looking at, when you're growing up or now, like the influences and things that go into there. I'm just interested in that,
Yeah,
so that's why I'm asking.
sure. Yeah. I remember when I was very young, I think like 6 maybe, one of my uncles would babysit me a lot while my parents were working. And he had a PhD in physics and math. And so I would ask him about black holes. And he would tell me about how, like, as something is approaching a black hole, it gets stretched out. It gets elongated
Yeah,
because it's
yeah,
speeding up as it gets closer and closer. As it gets sucked into it, it like just elongates until it like sort of breaks apart. And so the question I would always ask him is like, what happens if a human gets too close to a black hole? And he was
yeah,
like, well, they would get like really elongated out a lot, but you yourself wouldn't be able to perceive that from your own if you were the person. But as a
yeah,
bystander watching it happen to somebody else, um, that's what they would see. And I just remember at the time, I was so mind blown by that because
yeah,
that's not anything that we would ever be able to see in our day-to-day lives, but that is absolutely what we would see in that context out
yeah,
there.
yeah,
And that sort of set the stage for the kinds of things that I would find fascinating for the rest of my life. The things that we can't that we would never be able to see in our own day to day, but that in a different context, they're behaving in such a radically different way that we are not used to. And that creates sort of a jarring image almost.
yeah. I always get a thrill in like in talking art and philosophy and science and physics, because I haven't done as many shows as I want to, but like something rather than nothing. I mean, you could present it as a science, a science
Oh,
explanation, a
sure.
science show.
For
I mean,
sure.
not. I mean, I'm not sure what I've done with something rather than nothing with the podcast, but I do support it. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But so you can approach it different ways. And I've had like an episode with Dr. Erin McDonald, who's PhD astrophysicist. She's even an animated character in a Star Trek
Oh, wow.
animate. Yeah, they animated her. So like we all want to be animated, I think. And but it was such a cool episode because I was able to really like drop down into not a passing fancy, but something I've studied on the side for a long time, trying to understand, because my background is formerly English literature and philosophy
That's awesome.
and
Yeah.
and labor, so but on the science piece, what happened to me when I was studying philosophy, and let's say for the sake of discussion, these questions, the big questions, my head was in traps because they were like Western philosophy traps. My mind got out of some of these traps by understanding Eastern philosophy and studying Buddhism deeply, and by being taught informally in developing my thinking on science and quantum mechanics and astrophysics by like talking to people, being like, I'm interested in what you do. Can you talk at me for 2 hours? And some of them would, like, and that's so I always get thrilled when you're talking about like that thing that you can't see, right? The elongated person. And I think Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four, I'm like, that's where Mr. Fantastic comes from. He's all stretchy. I'm like, that's what I think of. But I love talking about each of these different type of things, art, philosophy, science, because if the question is bold enough, philosophy ain't going to give you the answer to everything I've been asking or like try to ask it. There's a lot of ways to think about why the hell it all is.
Yeah.
All right, Chloe. Sorry, long lead, and I'm gonna let you give you the chance to talk there. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this. So I think that there's a couple of answers. So the short, boring answer is we don't know. The longer, more interesting answer, I think, is that if you go back to, if we get like literal for a second, we go back to the Big Bang, and we ask like, well, what came before that? Or like,
Right.
did something happen before that? We don't know. But if it was intentional, if we look at the Fibonacci sequence and how that shows up in a lot of different patterns in
Tell me
nature.
about it. Tell me about it.
Yeah, the Fibonacci sequence that shows up, in flower petal patterns and in snail shells and in all variety of different patterns in nature. There's something about it that just almost seems intentional, like it was meant to be designed that way. And I don't know, like if that is the case, then maybe there's like some kind of higher intelligence out there. But if there is, then I think that it's probably so abstract that it's like so beyond what we're able to comprehend. And humans tend to project themselves, their own qualities onto that kind of thing all the time, because that's what humans do. They fill in the gaps of what they don't know. But my guess, like, if there is something like that, then it probably is like way beyond our understanding, and we might never understand, fully grasp the magnitude of it and how it all works. And I think that there's a lot more to reality than what we are privy to at this point in time as well.
I'd agree with that, and I really like the psychological components to the answer, because I really jibe with that about like, there's like an agnostic undercurrent, right? Like that where I have this mind. Can I declaratively state that something cannot exist? And if I can't declaratively state that something does not exist, then you're left in a position of openness, I think, or investigation, or and that's for me. Like, I've defined myself politically as an atheist because, like, when I'm in public and I'm dealing with people, I don't want to friggin' get into the debate. It's not where I want to spend my time.
Yeah.
What I do want to do is explore the questions and have an audience and be able to, to get into it. But those kind of easy fights that are out there, at least for me, about the way somebody behaves as a religious person, those are all around us.
Right.
It's just like, how do we get at this question productively and with a curious spirit? And like I said, I love the psychological piece of like how we project ourselves. Like there's always something if like God looks like a 72-year-old white man with a big beard, then
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I
I
think
mean, come on.
there's so much that we don't know. And like we're finding out more all the time about different things in the universe, but I think it's always good to keep an open mind and be open to the fact that we don't know how it all works as much as we might like to think that we do.
Yeah. Different question. You ever tried to depict the elongated person? The idea of the elongated person?
I have thought about it. I just haven't gotten to it yet because I'm on other assignments. But if I ever get a chance,
don't tempt you. Don't tempt you. We have deadlines.
well, if I ever get a chance, I will gladly take it on. So
No, that's really super. Chloe, I wanna just chat or have you tell some folks about maybe uh where to find your work, what you got going on generally with your art and ideas like that.
yeah, I have a website. It's chloeniclas.com. And my Instagram is also chloe.niclas. And people might see my work in the wild as it gets published. I have a couple of things coming out soon that I don't think I can say yet because it's not published yet. So
Yeah, that's fine.
but yeah, that'll be coming soon. And those are the places. Those are the places. The wild, my website, and Instagram.
Yeah, I've no your work's wonderfully displayed on the website, and it's nice to see those pieces, and your pieces are in different spots. You got to pull them together for folks. So
Yeah.
really, that's great stuff. So I've really enjoyed chatting about like, philosophy, like science and like this idea of the worlds that you talk about. I really just think it's like expanded my like that ocean space like idea is so like marvelous because it's like when I think about the explorations and talking to you and thinking about this show, it's expansive on out. It's like trying to recognize what we don't know, which is like goes back to like philosophy. It's like if you're smart, you don't know shit.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right? I don't know if that's how Socrates said it in Greek, but
probably along those lines.
You think you know everything. You're a schmuck.
It's true.
Yeah, that's our conclusion. Chloe, great fortune to you and everything you do. Love your work, and I'm very glad that the listeners will be able to come in contact with your thoughts. And everybody, check out Chloe Niclas. Really enjoy her work.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.